This is the No BS Bishop Podcast. We're alive to love, and all other values are potential BS. Now here's your host, Bishop Randy Dean.
I want people to say, oh, he might have been on to something. He talked to that beautiful, brilliant human being there in Eau Claire and a variety of others. So to that end, I'm deeply interested in where you see all of this circumnavigation that has been going on in history as it relates to 2025. And I'll throw one other thing in on that for you, just to add a little more juice to the mix. I believe that all that's happening to us right now has a destiny written into it, just as the civil rights movement came from World War II, where black soldiers were treated as human beings on the battlefield. But when they came home, something changed. And that furnace created a Martin Luther King Jr. and others. So now what do you see in 2025, given everything we're discussing? Where are we headed? Where do you surmise we may be headed?
Well, I'm looking at the violence. And I think that the biggest thing that has been concerning me has always been to prevent violence. The actions I and Uniting Bridges took in 2020 here,
Right,
during the marching season, working with the police, which I got criticized for, working with the city, was all to prevent violence. Preventing violence, I think, is the most important thing. But I struggle with it because there's other historians, especially historians of totalitarianism, who talk about their beliefs that nonviolence can't work in the face of authoritarianism and totalitarianism. And that's what makes it hard. I mean, history, the joke is that history doesn't repeat, it rhymes.
I like that.
You know, because historians are not political scientists. We're not going to pull out something and say this is always happening and that will happen.
Right.
But there are some lessons from the civil rights movement. And one of the ones that worries me, because the police here in Eau Claire have learned it, and the international standards have learned it, and there's a number of organizations who are pushing this, I think the big city police have not.
No.
I had someone ask me recently, well, what would be a police department, a large, over 100,000 one that you would recommend? I couldn't think of one in the U.S.
Oh, really?
I really couldn't, because what they're too numbers focused, one, and not anti-corruption enough. And it'd be corruption of some of the police unions. That's a whole podcast and a half. Let's push that all the way to the back.
Yeah. And don't even mention George Floyd.
You know, I was on the police and fire commission here when that happened. There's all sorts of stuff there.
Oh, my.
Y'all go look the conversation color for those.
Right.
But I couldn't. And that's because it didn't matter. It wasn't a matter of race. It was a matter of empire and institution.
Oh,
and what
that's good.
We miss about this whole time period, and what we miss about these churches are a production of humans.
Mm-hmm.
They're a production of humans. And while my Catholic Church likes to say we're the one that Jesus founded, this is Peter's rock, it's still been corrupted by humans. You know, we have to strip away that corruption.
Yeah.
And we have to be willing to look at our churches and say, that's not serving. And that has nothing to do with the Bible. And that has nothing to do with the Gospels. Because I guess I am a gospel first person. I like to say I'm a red letter Christian.
Same here.
I'm only worried about the words of Jesus, the rest of it's commentary. And
same here.
You have to think that given how the empires Christianity has had to live under, how that Sermon on the Mount has survived, as anti-materialist, as anti-elitism, as pro-mercy as it is, How has someone not edited out? How? Because they messed with the Bible.
Oh,
The people who want to say that didn't happen have not been paying attention to history.
Right. Yeah.
And here in Wisconsin, we know Reggie White was learning Aramaic before he died because he hadn't figured it out. How did that Sermon on the Mount survive? That brings me to the idea that the red letters are the reason we have to pay attention to. But it's my historian training that makes me then look at the Bible through the lens of history and methodology.
Yes.
And start comparing things, what's authentic, what's not, which ones support each other, which ones do not. Looking at Paul and understanding that a rhetorical device was to say, ironically, the Bible is a flat page. When Paul lectured, Roman and Hebrew devices were to say the opposite of what you meant.
Yeah.
Ironically, he probably was a clown up there, inflecting and dancing and everything else from that history of that time period.
Yeah.
And then to say what you mean. And people will say, well, why are there contradictions in Paul? And those pieces in there, they want to act as if they're gospel truth. They're not. They were rhetorical devices, but because we don't study history, we don't know that. So we have a hard time
into it rather than from it.
We read it. It's the sociological idea of comfort. We will twist everything. We will make evil and good.
And there's that
to make
hubris
ourselves
again.
comfort. And
Right.
hubris. And that's what I'm worried about right now, because I'm looking at corrupted institutions. And it's not just the religious institutions. It's corrupted institutions across this country, and the people who are complacent because they are comfortable or because they are anxious and they think these people who are objectively not doing good will protect them. And they think that if these people are doing evil acts, it's okay because they'll come out good in the end. But there are never, good doesn't come from evil. And that brings us back to King and the heartless of nonviolence. And that brings us back to that idea that you have to use violence towards authoritarian entities. Because it's too easy, once you go down that road, to start justifying the violence and to justify these ideas. We've had conversations over, and I teach military history, so I approach this with a military history idea. When does a guerrilla freedom fighter become a terrorist? Ask a bunch of students that who are going to be social studies ed and military cadets.
Yeah.
And then ask some people who have to live in that country.
And then talk about the American Revolution, which was a guerrilla movement.
And the British see it as a terrorist organization. You know, I mean, it's we use these words, but we don't think about what they mean in some ways. And we don't think about what our obligations are to other people. I talk about Black Republicanism, which is not the same as being a Black Republican. Black Republicanism, which the Black soldiers have, and this is, I've already published articles with this stuff in it, they felt they had an obligation to protect their community. That's why the Klan always targets soldiers first. Soldiers and women. Targeting the soldiers is you remove the protectors. Targeting the women is to tell the men that they have no power to protect the weakest among them.
My goodness.
And you look through the 60s, and this is the pattern of violence. If you really want to read about that, Chalmers' book, Backfire, which is how Klan violence backfired in the 1960s. I cannot predict the future, but I know that people get tired of corruption. We're seeing that backfire today. And it looks like the backfire of 1928 to 1932. against corruption. It looks like the progressive era backfire of the 1880s. And we just have to be careful that the people on the right side and the left side get too much hubris, whether it's a religious hubris or it's a secular hubris, to think that they know everything that needs to be done without talking to the people who are in it, without talking to the poor people who need the help. We have to resist the history of predestination in this country.
Right.
To believe that if you're poor, you deserve to be poor.
You were born that way, you're stuck.
And that it's a bloodline idea that you're poor.
Mm-hmm.
And to not look at the circumstances that make it easy to be poor, and that, to be honest, make decisions we see poor out here rational in that moment. We also have to remember that humans, I always start my classes off with this. History is the study of humans, and humans are crazy. Humans can be, we're a mess. Irrational.
Yeah.
We get high. People have been getting high since the beginning of time.
Oh, right.
We think we discovered it. We did not discover drugs.
Right.
I tell my teenagers, they all think they discovered all this coolness and stuff. It's like, no.
Sometime when we have time, I'll have to tell you my story of Jonesing on the boat, which is the story of Noah. So the first thing he does after they're high and dry is he plants a vineyard.
Yes.
Because there's not a liquor store down the road.
And he needed it.
And he was like, I'm done with that boat.
Yes.
First thing he does is he gets so drunk he loses his clothes, which leads me to another Bible versing idea that created hubris in a denomination I was a part of, was the curse of Ham, the mark of blackness.
And see,
from
those are people who haven't read it.
Exactly.
He did not curse Ham, he cursed the children.
Exactly.
And those children, I have to be careful the way I say this. We're not black. They were the Palestinians.
Oh, my. Oh,
this verse was meant to give Palestine to the Israelis. It was not meant to curse black people.
Wow.
But here is where you get that hubris that you know, but that comfort that is used to twist.
Yeah.
Because only in the U.S. do you get that interpretation.
So the comfort, that's the devil right there.
Well, all right, let's be honest. Reading genealogies is boring as heck. Who wants to read through all that list of genealogies? But if you read through them, you'd know it.
Yes, you would.
And the whole thing, we won't even go into Leviticus and slavery, and you're not supposed to be raping your slaves, and you're not supposed to be doing all this stuff. But, who wants to read through Leviticus? What minister wants to sit up there and read everything in Leviticus?
Yeah, you won't have a job long.
And who wants to read Leviticus at night to your kid?
Oh, heavens. Oh, I think that's what's wrong with Scott, is that he's had Leviticus read to. I'm kidding.
Leviticus and Deuteronomy outside of certain parts, it's like an accounting book.
It is.
And Americans don't like math. And we don't like accounting.
And
we
the
don't
devil,
want to do.
And the devil is in the details.
The details.
Right there.
So you hear that son of Ham argument.
Yeah.
Then if you go look, it is not supported. And Moses was interracially married. Don't even start the hell that one starts when people talk about that. There is a whole thing in Deuteronomy where Miriam is struck with leprosy.
Yes.
Because she was criticizing Moses for marrying the Ethiopian woman.
Right.
And Moses is the one who was taken bodily to heaven, the beloved of God. So you look at that, and then it goes again to this idea. There is a Christian culture, but there is also a Christian belief. And the culture is not the same as the belief. When Bob Jones University was getting in trouble in the late 90s, and they were getting challenged on their ban on interracial marriage and dating, and they tried to look at the Bible to see the supports
Yeah, yeah.
Couldn't find them.
Yeah, yeah.
And you add to that, there is a very specific quote, and I want to say it's not Matthew, it's John, where Jesus has a talk with either an Eritrean or Numidian soldier.
Oh,
And
yes.
forgives him and invites him into the kingdom. So it's clear that the kingdom was going to be interracial. And Jesus is also, if you look at Revelations, was brown.
Yes.
He has bronze feet. You know, that's not going to be, I'm sorry, y'all, but that's not Norwegians. Y'all ain't brown. I mean,
no, far from it. And listen, in the book of Acts, Philip speaks to and leads the Ethiopian eunuch into faith, largely ignored as any kind of revolutionary movement, and yet clearly spoke to, first of all, this Ethiopian eunuch was transgender. Yeah. Not by choice, perhaps, but what we know is this is an African, and he's transgender, the first outside convert to Christianity is in that category, and we just quickly turn that page. We don't want to talk about that too much.
And we don't want to talk about the Spartan who brought his servant, he brought his lover to Jesus to be healed. We don't want to talk about the role of women in the Gospels and how it was the women who stood with Jesus when he was crucified and why it was. And it was the women who first declared when he was risen. But we don't want to talk about the social reasons why that happened, because there is a comfort for people who need structure and who don't want to think about these things in saying that the Bible says. Yeah. But the Bible is not a for dummies workbook.
No.
And this is where it becomes, in these times, hard for Christians who want to stay faithful to the words of Jesus, especially to turn the other cheek.
Heavens.
And who is the least among us? Is it the prisoner? Jesus said the prisoner, but people don't want to deal with people who've been in jail. People want to be hard on crime. Yeah. People don't want to be merciful.
Yeah.
Is it the unborn? The unborn has more protections right now than probably you and me.
That's right. That's right.
Is it the foreigner? Well, we see explosions of anti-immigrant malice in U.S. history, 1840, 1880, 1920, 1960, again in the 1980s. Under Reagan, now we have one. And you know what? The rhetoric used against the German immigrants in Wisconsin is the same rhetoric we see today.
Yes, it is.
Used against Mexicans, used against all of these others.
Yes, it is.
Doesn't matter whether they're skilled or not skilled, legal or not legal.
Yes, it is.
They are afraid of their religion. They're afraid of their culture.
Right.
They accuse them of crime.
Right.
I can show you quotes from the newspapers in the 1840s against the Irish.
Oh, heavens, yes.
And they will look exactly like now. The irony is to see people who are German or Jewish or Black, and they are using the exact same words from the 1920s that were used against their ancestors.
The Declaration of Independence discusses immigration.
Yes.
From birth, we've had this complaint, one side or the other. And the writers said Great Britain is seeking to restrict immigration. And so right from the beginning, we've had to have this adult conversation. And now we're trying to shuffle it off to the side. Now, I haven't been good about watching our time. I don't know where we're at, Scott, but you're supposed to be in charge of that, I think. Isn't that your job? But anyway, on there. Yeah. Okay. Another personal anecdote for myself. When I was 7 years old, first trip I took to Texas, my dad was from Texas. So I'm familiar with Slidell, familiar with East Texas. That's where he was from, into Louisiana. And he took us as a family into East Texas during Jim Crow.
Yeah.
And so with my little 7-year-old eyes, I saw whites only signs. I saw coloreds only water fountains. I walked a sidewalk with my father in Winsboro, Texas, and an African-American was walking toward us, and my dad nudged me, and he said, "Watch." This gentleman stepped off the sidewalk and stood in the street while we walked by. He made way without a word. My 7-year-old brain was on fire with confusion, and I must understand what is happening here. So my personal anecdotes are just full of this tug of war that I'm grateful for, and yet at the same time saddened that all of that was presented to me as this is the truth. So to that end, now my point is, that's in my lifetime. We're distanced from these matters. We are not free from these suggestions. This psychological imprint is still with us. Am I right?
Yes. I mean, my older brother, born in 1958, went to segregated schools until he was a senior, 1973.
Holy heavens.
Because in the rural areas, they didn't integrate until they were forced to.
Right.
And there are still areas in New Orleans to this day. They're segregated, and they'll try to say it's by choice, but it's not.
No.
And there are places that I don't go when I'm there and when I'm in LA because I know better. In 2010, I went to a police conference, and they kept talking about race out of place. And there's a certain sheriff who used to wear a big Texas hat, and he was black, and he and I got into it because he said, well, if they're white in a black area, I'll go shake them down too. And I looked at him and said, I'm a Creole. Those are probably my relatives, and they're actually black.
Yeah.
Why don't I have the right to live in peace? Because I am the race out of place. Because you are too lazy to do the work you need to do to figure out who actually does the crime. So if I want to get away with crime up here in Eau Claire, I just put somebody in a suit and they'll be okay? No, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. But that is the danger of comfort, because we want to be comfortable with ourselves. We want to think we're good. And when we do something we're ashamed of, we want to twist it and we want to make excuses. And I think, this Christianity of the third and the fourth tenets of nonviolence, that to see your oppressors as not victims, but as in pain. And they're hurting you to relieve their pain.
Yes.
And to hate the act that they're engaging in, but not to hate them, and not to engage in hating an entire group, to continue to individualize, which is, it gets to that, what does equality look like? It's individualizing. It is treating me as Selika, not me as who I should be if I'm black.
Correct.
I still remember, it was 1988. I was already accepted in grad school, and I had a TA in world history, big Irish guy, Irish Catholic. And he saw I had a scapula, which is in this case, it was a cloth, and it's on a cloth rope that I wore.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Ohio. I think I wore it more to tick off the people who didn't like Catholics than anything else.
Oh, you're that kind of person.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I love you so
Quiet.
much. Yeah.
So, but I had a scapula on.
Yeah.
He saw it, and all of a sudden, now I'm a tall woman, but he was taller than me, grabbed it by the back of the neck, and he's pulling it and going, "Why are you wearing a scapula? Blacks can't be Catholic." He's from Boston.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going to say his name because he's still out there, but he knows who he is, and there were witnesses.
Mercy.
And he pulled it, and I'm trying not to choke, and I'm pulling it. I am a black Catholic. I'm from Louisiana. Darn library or top to pre. So he finally did, and he had to come back to me the next week and go, "I didn't know y'all could be Catholic." Because it was a stereotype. We were all supposed to be Baptist.
Exactly. Exactly.
You know, and
Have
social media shows me things because they think I'm supposed to want them. I think I confuse the algorithms. But they're not the things I want to see because they don't know who I am. They just think that because of my race and my gender, they know what I should be in their minds
Right.
to make them comfortable. I've had people say, "I'm not really black, I'm white," because the way I act is not stereotypical. That's the only way they can be comfortable, if that makes sense.
It's that psychological tug of war that they've not identified. They have not, and we are still, all of us, myself included, are still identifying every layer of that. And what you just mentioned from Principle 3, was it?
Yes.
Nonviolence recognizes that evildoers are also victims
Yeah.
and are not evil people. The nonviolent resistor seeks to defeat evil, not persons victimized by
Yes.
evil. That's genius. And where was it that King said, and through this our victory will be a double victory?
Yes.
Do you recall that quote, that we will love you though you hunt us down, though you lynch, we will love you, and our victory will be a double victory. And I think that statement speaks into that psychological tug of war that
Because
we're still pulling.
it's easy to hate.
Right.
It is easy to
So
hate.
easy.
It's comfortable to hate. It gives you energy. It feels good when you're angry. And I mean, I'm still struggling with this. I went off on somebody last June. But, you know, you look at that 3 and you look at 4. 4 is we want to make of our enemy a friend.
Mm-hmm.
How hard is that? You know, you look, and there are people who are trying to model this for us, from the Sikh temple shooting, the son of one of the imams who was killed, and one of the guys who managed to escape the white supremacist organization,
Yes.
have been going around and talking to people about how you forge friendships across.
Mm-hmm.
WHIPS is going towards One Wisconsin, which I was one of the co-chairs this past year. We brought in a couple, they're Jewish and Arab, to talk about Gaza and the Middle East and how many interfaith marriages there are and how the violence keeps radicalizing people.
Right.
How do we make of these so-called enemies a friend when we don't see them as human?
And the Christian community in Palestine is enormous.
Yes, it is.
The blindness to that alone is stunning. The churches of that little slice of geography are historic. They're ancient and beautiful.
But just for saying this, just for even talking about it, there's people who will want to silence this because there are people who, it's the whiz. Don't nobody bring me no bad news. If I don't have to hear it, I don't have to think about it. If I don't have to think about it, I don't have to be uncomfortable. But how do you make a friend of your enemy if you're not willing to be uncomfortable and you're not willing to listen and you're not willing to be challenged? The H-1B issue has come up again.
Oh, mercy. Yes.
And, you know, I remember in 2000 when American programmers could not get jobs because businesses would advertise the position, interview 2 or 3, and then say they weren't qualified because they didn't want to take the pay cut, and bring in H-1Bs. There was a lot of resentment. But on the other hand, my husband, who was a programmer, was also working with a lot of guys from India and sub-Saharan Africa, and said, these are good people. We should be angry at the program, but not at the people. Don't stereotype the people, fix the program. The same with the L1 program, which brings in agricultural workers, which would bring them in and really keep them in almost like slavery. But there were people who were complaining about it in Florida and blaming the immigrants instead of blaming the program.
The system.
Because it's easy to, and this goes to the biblical idea of scapegoats.
Right.
Divide and conquer is based on who do I scapegoat. And if I scapegoat them, then it's very easy for me to ignore the corruption coming from this big guy who could hurt me if I go after them. But the problem with scapegoats is it violates number 4. How do I make of my scapegoat a friend? And how do I make of the people who scapegoat me a friend? Because a scapegoat's a stereotype and it's easy to do. But the hard thing is to deal with that institutional corruption. And we've had institutional corruption since probably 800, 900 BCE. I mean, I'd say Assyrians.
Yes.
Babylonians had institutional corruption. The kings that they loved.
And Dr. King said
corrupt.
it's an evil thing to say to a man, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, to a man who has no shoes.
Well, the joke is that bootstrap thing was originally the opposite.
Oh.
It was the actual quote was, you can't pull yourself up from your bootstraps if you have no shoes.
Right.
And it came from the 1890s. But people switched it. And I think this is maybe the last thing we should think about. Christians need to be careful of the media we consume.
Yes.
That does not mean don't consume it. It means we think about it analytically. We don't accept it unquestioningly. And I think that's the problem of, again, the discomfort, getting comfortable with the discomfort of the third and the fourth tenets of nonviolence. Nonviolence is provocative.
Oh.
Actions that we don't think should be provocative are provocative. The act today of saying, I think Palestinians are victims of both Hamas and Israel. I think the Israeli people and the Palestinian people are caught between the government of Israel and Hamas. And they're both victims. When you put this on the air, there are going to be people who could come after me for that statement.
Come after me too, please.
But it's absolutely true.
It is.
Because it's easy to say, oh, the Israelis are just bad. And it's not an accurate statement. The Israelis are in a hard place because of Hamas.
Right.
But Hamas acts that way. Well, they're corrupt. But the Palestinian people act that way because they're afraid. And then the Israelis act that way because they're afraid and they're anxious. And anxiety is kind of like the human kryptonite. Anxiety comes in, we get crazy.
And then interstage, right? The industrial military complex called the US of A, pouring trainloads of money into the militarization of the nation of Israel, which I always like to distinguish the Jewish people.
Yeah, they're different. They're different.
Political system that they're a part of.
If someone ever took a look at that, and we aren't even going to get into cost plus contracts and all of that stuff in here. I could talk about military contracting and waste of money and
Yeah.
all of that. That's a whole nother podcast.
Perfect. I think that's
But
4 podcasts we
That's
just
4
discussed.
podcasts away.
Yeah.
But the Israelis
yeah.
right now are the top country in the world for night attack and for cyber war.
Oh,
They have the top companies for that and for protecting as well as causing. Why are we subsidizing that? Couldn't we use that money for our health care?
oh,
And I'm not saying that as an anti-Semitic person.
right.
Because I'm saying this as an American. Why are we subsidizing a successful set of companies? But to say that somebody's immediately going to name call me reflexively because they're not thinking, because it's comfortable, because they mistake criticism for attack. And this is at the heart of what I'm saying. We have to be more careful. In the U.S., we have a right to critique. We have a right to say the government's wrong. We have a right to say they're making a mistake. And we have a right to say that to anybody. But we sometimes are just too harsh. We need to think about how to constructively critique rather than criticize and play gotcha. I mean, there's a FCC word that begins with a W that I generally, call academic, where academic one-upmanship.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it because it'll get you in trouble. But academic one-upsmanship doesn't do anything for you. This is geekery. And people don't need homework from people they've never seen before.
And that's a part of that struggle I am holding before people about having adult conversations.
Well, I'm going to put a shout out to this one website. When I train people, I use a list from a website called Derailing for Dummies.
Okay.
And I tell people, don't say these things.
Okay.
Because people who want to win rather than to understand
Correct.
will engage in this derailing because they want to move the conversation to where they feel comfortable. And what we want to get away from is people derailing and instead people saying, I think you could make this better by. I think you could make this publishable by.
Yeah.
Or I want to understand why you feel this way. What is it you're really trying to get at? Is it really about immigrants or is it about something else? Is it really about you think Black people are this way or is it something else?
Right.
Is it anxiety? And it's hard. It's hard to ask people who are on the business end of hate to be patient, which is what nonviolence asks us to do, to be patient, to be loving, to be caring.
Well, it was it was in Birmingham, I think, that King also said, that was the garbage truck strike workers. And he was pressed by people. How long? What must we do to get this wrong righted? And his quote from there, which has been abused in some ways, I think, but he said, the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. And I've said that to somebody and they said, well, that's just not true. King is wrong. I said, whoa. In context, he's speaking to a place that has been long suffering.
Yes.
And he's attempting to help them find a way to take another step. One more step, the moral arc of the universe. The problem with the person I was talking to was, well, but at the end, justice isn't what God is after. God is after love. And I said, no, wait a minute. Let me give you another Dr. King quote, and that is, when all things are summed up, the end of all things will be summed up in unconditional love and unarmed truth and unconditional love. So King was not a one-page guy. He had a variety of layers in that that view of the quote unquote end, but that the moral arc of the universe is, I think, the key to what is that and how does that look? And that's where we're talking now. How does that look now? Where are we in that arc of the universe?
We'll see I know that quote, and that quote has always been hard for me.
Right.
Because I think we have to bend
Yes.
the arc of the universe towards justice.
Yes.
But for someone to say love does not have justice in it
Oh,
is very difficult for me to
Oh.
process.
I'm with you.
I'm trying to process this because
I tried to keep that conversation as an adult conversation.
It's because you must have justice.
Yeah.
And when you don't have justice, you have people always want to talk about forgiveness. And then they think forgiveness is forgetting.
No.
You can forgive without reconciling. But you can't reconcile, which is what number 4 asks us for, without justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's some people you're never going to reconcile with. You look at the Sermon on the Mount and he says, if you can't, you walk away from them.
Right.
You don't keep harassing them and
Right.
things away. You walk away, but you have to put in the work. And that's where comfort, fear, and anxiety, I think, make it very hard for us to put in the work. You know, because anxiety can be physical. And we have a country that is so anxious. And we have a generation that has lost its social skills behind a screen.
Heavens. Yes.
And we have generations who think that any criticism, any pushback is an attack on their freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't have a conversation unless you're listening. And that's what's been lost.
Right.
The listening and the humility to say, well, maybe we can compromise and meet here. Because each of these groups feel that there is a sin involved. And they're not sins. You can't compromise with sins. But this is where you get to that. They are mistaking a Christian culture for Christianity. You know, I have 2 kids, and I am a Southerner, and I grew up in this sort of socially conservative milieu. And I'm having to get used to Eau Claire, Wisconsin teenage behavior and clothing choices. And children walking out the door when it's 10 degrees wearing shorts, which I don't understand. But that is not a sin. It may not be bad. It may not be good judgment, but it's not a sin. If I treat it as a sin and if I demand compliance,
Right.
I will lose my kids.
If you legislate that compliance.
You know, and I think that, again, is where Christianity has gone astray. The people who want the government to enforce what they see as Christian doctrine don't understand that when you mix government with religion, you get corruption.
Yep.
We've got a couple of centuries of Spanish administration to show us that.
Mm-hmm.
We have King Henry. It just can't be done. There is no way to mix religion with government structures without causing corruption and without the religion being corrupted. Religion must be a choice.
So to that end, in my journey in the past 6 years, going to people I call spiritual refugees. These are the folks that amongst that 40 to 45 million Americans who have exited the brick and mortar of church and faith. I made it my determination early on. I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to love them and listen. Somebody said to me right away, they said, and will you have a conversation with them about coming back? I said, no, I won't. I'm going to let them arrive at their own conclusions. They have to come to their own conclusions. I mean, never mind Adam and Eve were given their own conclusions. Here you go. Here's your conclusions. And to love and to listen means that I've decided I need to learn as much or more than the person I'm having this conversation with. That spiritual refugee can certainly teach me something. And I feel like I've earned an unofficial PhD in loving and listening to people who've said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore in the pews. I can't do this anymore in the churches. It's not working. I'm not seeing these adult conversations about race, about sexuality. I'm not seeing adult conversations about abortion or other key issues that are just not going to go away. So that's where I'm landing in this day and time. And I'm kind of bringing us in for a landing now, too. So you really do push all the buttons on Randy Dean, let me tell you. And then for you to talk about being from almost East Texas, which is...
Well, I've spent some time in Houston.
Okay.
I lived in Houston. I have driven, unfortunately, I-10 through Vidor and Orange County.
Oh, my.
Gassed up in Beaumont and didn't stop driving till I got to Houston.
Well, see, and my wife is a West Texan. She's from Plainview, large migrant agricultural area. I was just having this conversation with Scott about the local Catholic church in her hometown is entirely Mexican.
Yep.
With a white priest. And that is a bustling, hustling, growing, healthy church. And the rest of town is not sure what to do with that. So that's a whole nother, that's podcast number 5. So maybe I need to go down to Plainview and interview that priest and find out what's cooking there.
We've got about 6 podcasts for you, Scott. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm loving all of this, but we do need to bring it in for a landing. Thank you. Seriously, and I don't know how to say that any more profoundly. Thank you. Thank you for you. I like to say that to people. Thank you for you and what you've taken in yourself, of yourself, through all of the other iterations of life and beauty and intellectualism, as well as spirituality, which is where I'm living and breathing and eating and sleeping with what I'm trying to do here. Thank you for you. And for all of those who joined us in this phenomenal conversation. Seriously, this is beautiful and powerful. And again, a part of my loving and listening. So anything you want to say to help wrap us up?
You know, I have to thank Scott for introducing me to a beautiful soul here.
Thanks.
But I think that as we consume this media, as we go forward, if we can look at it with much more of a grain of salt.
Oh, right.
And as we see the people who are different from us, if we can continue to try to individualize them and keep in mind always that religion or not religion is a choice.
Right.
And it's not one we get to make for them. And we don't know the best for everybody else.
That's right.
You know, that's that first step to learning to listen and grow and talk across these ideas.
Right.
Americans have always taken the best of both sides. We have always prided ourselves in the past on being non-ideological. And that's sort of gotten destroyed somewhere in the last, I'd say since 2008.
Yeah.
And I think we need to start thinking very hard about not being ideological, but being welcoming and loving and individualizing, always individualizing. And if we can do that, we can move forward and we can get through whatever troubling times we're in. If we can't do that, Hang on to your hats and glasses. It's
Yeah,
going to be an interesting
Yeah,
ride.
right. Yeah, keep your seatbelt attached. It's going to get bumpy.
Yes.
E pluribus unum comes to my mind, and the old adage as a kid was the melting pot that we thought we were. All of that. It's waiting for discovery. It's waiting adult conversations.
Nuance is always a good thing.
Right.
Nothing is ever going to be black and white. Nothing's
Right.
going to be absolute. Never say never. The universe laughs at you.
Yes, yes, indeed. All right. Again, thank you, Selika. I'm the better person for all of this little slice of time together. And thank you for joining us. Bishop Randy Dean here, the No BS Bishop. I'm alive to love. This is my sign off. I'm alive to love because all lesser values than love are potential BS. Leave me out of that conversation. Love is my goal. God bless you. Happy trails, y'all.
Thanks for listening to the No BS Bishop podcast. If you like the show, leave a comment on it. Or, even better, share it with your friends. And we'll see you on the next one.